So,
Well,
yeah, today's episode is dedicated to delivering bad news. But before we get into delivering bad news, why don't we just tell everybody a little bit about ourselves for those who don't know us? So, Oz, I vote you to go first.
when you voted for me, Helen, do you
Mhm.
second that motion?
Everyone,
Uh,
I feel like
uh,
Oz
oh,
doesn't need to introduce himself.
right.
Everybody knows
Oh,
the great and
well,
wonderful Oz.
well, I'm Oz Du Soleil here in Las Vegas, and I have the YouTube channel Excel on Fire, and I am left-handed, and I have pretty legs.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. Okay, Helen, I'm going to let you follow that amazing introduction. Tell everybody about you.
Hi, I'm Helen Wall, and I am also left-handed. And I'm a data scientist, and I work in a lot of different tools and applications. So different data science programming languages, Power BI, AWS, and so on. And I'm always learning something new too.
That is incredible. I am right-handed for all of
Oh,
those
oh,
playing at home.
yeah.
So
All
I'm with the
right.
two lefties today. I like it. I'm Robin Hunt, CEO and co-founder of Think Data Solutions, and I'm a data analyst some days and a data educator every day, and just excited to be here. If you're joining us and in the comments, tell us where you're coming from. We're happy to have you
Yeah.
here.
See,
And
you
if
see.
you have anything to feed to the feed, put it on. And if
Yeah.
we can review it and talk about it, we'll definitely do that. So I
Feeding
was
to the feed, and we
recently
got Jill left-handed, we got Yafet and Yusuf.
Jill. I
Yeah,
love
Jill.
Jill. Hey, Jill.
All right,
Jill's from my
Jill.
hometown.
Yeah, and
Jill
the
is
hometown is
left-handed as
up on a
well. How
hill,
about that?
right?
I like it.
We
The
did
Um,
get
hometown
to
is. Oh yes, Eric Hartwig.
Eric,
Yes,
Savannah.
great guy
Okay,
that we got to meet. Yeah, yeah. All right.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Show Jill up here. All right, fantastic. Well, listen, I'm so happy to be here with y'all, and Jill and Eric will be familiar with what I'm about to say next because we were all together not too long ago
That's
in
right.
the Magic City in Birmingham, Alabama. We had our first live stage presentation of Data Fundamentals Unpacked, and we had Bill and Jenny here and you guys, and it was just like I had an amazing
Yeah.
experience being with y'all, spending time with y'all outside of the event was a lot of fun. Just being
Mm-hmm.
able to be with people that you share community and have shared experiences and shared skills. Even I think we all have some unique skills that not everybody has that allow us to share what we do in data. So it was just a big time. I really appreciate you guys coming for that while we talked about building our data workforce and announcing our national apprenticeship. It was just a lot of fun. But I want to know what you thought. Did you have a good time in the Magic City?
Yes, we did, especially because we had an amazing host, and the venue was really pretty.
Yeah, beautiful. We love the Al Stevens Center here for sure. Oz, what'd you think? Did you
Yeah.
enjoy coming to the
I,
Magic City?
yes, yes, I did. I really liked the city. Uh, is easy to get around, nice layout, good people all around, and to meet the people who showed up for the event. Just sharing a passion for data, whether it's in Excel or whatever, but to see people whose lives have been changed because they've been able to transition into real careers in Excel in data. And I like how you made the distinction between a career and a job.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So to have people who have used our content to change their lives, whether they've graduated from college and are pretty young, or they're transitioning, later in life. That was some beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
also
love that.
everyone works at a call center, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah,
We
oh, yeah.
learned that call center recruiting may
Yeah.
be,
Speaking of delivering bad
a
news, there's
worthwhile.
one place where, that's
Yeah,
just seems to be more common than a lot of others.
yeah. That was an interesting conversation to find out that I would not wish on anybody that they had a call center job, but it does seem like it was a proven ground for many of us, including me.
Yeah, that's so funny. And I received multiple messages from participants who came or attendees who came who said, "Oh yeah, and just FYI, I also had a call center experience." So that was just the little gift that just keeps on giving. I really enjoyed having the conversation in my local community about, the importance of data education, the importance of preparing our workforce to include data skills, talking about how that really begins at the earliest point of life all the way to the time you make it into the workforce. It just was a fantastic effort for us to even go through as a company to talk about how do we talk about what we do at Think Data. I was also very tickled to hear feedback from people saying, "Hey, we didn't really realize how involved in workforce development you guys actually were." And we didn't realize the impact of Think Data. And I sometimes think we're so caught up in it that we don't even think about it too much. So it just was a great time. But I really just thoroughly enjoyed having all my data family in town, and getting us on a stage together was a lot of fun. I look forward to doing that here in Birmingham again, but maybe also some other cities would be fun to go visit and pal around
Ooh,
in, and we'd just be a little traveling troop of data fam. I vote
yeah,
that should happen. I think that's a great next
I
step.
second that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah,
did lead us to this conversation today.
yes, yes.
And so let me talk about that, because if you didn't come to the event, you'll never get to experience it because I was delivered some terribly bad news, which was all the audio was lost. And I was very appreciative of how that technical difficulty was addressed, which is kind of why we talked about technical difficulties earlier this week on Data Fundamentals Impact. But also just really strongly appreciated the gentleman who, contacted me to tell me this bad news and how he approached it. I felt was very, it's like you're telling me the worst thing I ever want to hear right now in this moment in time,
Mhm.
but followed up with, but I fully respect how you just approached this, because you could have gone a million different ways and you handled it with the type of respect I feel like it needed, So, like, I have nothing negative to say about anything about how that news was delivered. But I thought, we have this event, we had all these big plans, now all those things are lost. How can I turn this into something that I can digest and accept? And I thought, after consulting with you guys on what my thoughts were, talking about how to deal with technical difficulties, it's important, but also, particularly for us, how to deliver bad news and what are the strategies around that. So, I mean, that's a very data thing to have to deal with, which is delivering news of all type, but particularly bad news can be challenging.
Yeah, and part of it comes out of my own concern, or like if you're going to be a good analyst, I found that a lot of times what we do with the data can be really easy, but the role has all kinds of other things going on.
Oh, that's a
And
lot.
a lot of it was, I learned I delivered a lot of bad news over my career as an analyst because I would find weird stuff. And say, wow, it's great to know how to do a pivot table or know all your 6 joins and power queries, or you can nest an X lookup inside an if, inside an is even, inside a sum product. Beautiful.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's other stuff involved that makes it really, really difficult.
Yeah, I think definitely delivering, you know, information that has kind of a negative connotation or doesn't really meet the expectations of what they think you're coming to say, like it gets uncomfortable for people
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to deal with that. And then it turns into like you address bad news based on your personality type.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm glad you said, okay, go ahead, Helen. Go ahead.
Well, I would also say that there's the timeliness of it too, and I think we've all had scenarios where maybe there was bad news that we needed to deliver, and we waited to deliver it because it's uncomfortable to deliver it, but I think that delaying the delivery of it is often causes more problems because there could be, say that you have an issue where the database all of a sudden doesn't pick up the numbers from the source it's connected to correctly.
Right.
And as soon as you notice that that's the point, say, okay, let me figure out what's going on or have a better idea. And then give yourself a deadline if you're stuck on something, because sometimes it's bad news, there's something off, but you're not entirely sure what's wrong with it. So I think also reaching out to other people that you trust to ask how they would approach it is important, and not waiting too long. I think that there is kind of a window to do it too, in the sense that sometimes if immediate when we find the problem, I think we're kind of overwhelmed by emotions, whether it's fear or anger, anxiety, and if we take a moment to kind of process it, and then we give ourselves a deadline in terms of, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. I'm going to give myself this amount of time to see what's happening, and then going from there, not necessarily delaying it, because otherwise it can compound, right? It may not be fixed tomorrow and it may be worse. So
Yeah. Oh,
it's
wow.
it's that window, and thinking about how to best approach it in a way that it's not rushed, or where you've done the analysis on what the problem is, and then what can we do to fix it. So the kind of two parts of it is that notice there's a problem, now here's what we can do to offset it, if that's a possibility. Sometimes we may not know what's going on.
I think that's what's really interesting about discussing this topic. Like, I think we could talk about this topic from now to the end of the world, right? Like, this is something that's going to always be occurring. So one thing I want us to do, like, quickly is let's just all agree on what we think, if we can, on what we decide is bad news, right? Just so to frame the rest of the conversation. So in my mind, when I think about delivering bad news on a technical project, in particular with data or maybe a software development, whatever, bad news in regards to something on the project or something I found in the data is something that may possibly change the mood and is definitely going to change the direction. Like that,
Yeah.
I know that that's like two things that are going to be a hallmark of what I would class, bad news on a project. It's not always traumatic. It's not always terrible, but it's always going to change the mood and change the direction. So that's kind of what my definition is. What do you guys think about
I
that?
like that. I like how you distill it down that far. Because bad news can be a lot of things. I've had to deliver bad news of the person you want to put in charge of this does not want to do it and is not paying attention when I'm trying to train and turn it over. So I don't know how you are going to deal with that. But I struggled, because it wasn't my choice. who to put on in charge of this thing.
Yes.
But I had to say something. And then I will find obsolete reports that have had us doing the wrong thing for months. And so now I got to say the report is bad. Here's the impact. And to fix it, we got to go through months of old stuff and get it all corrected. So those are three types of bad news they're going to change the mood, they're going to change the direction, and unexpected.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Yes.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about personality. And yeah, I wanted to have this conversation too because we got to get that kind of thing on the table because, delivering bad news, there is no like 9-step recipe for
Yeah.
this. You got to look at your personality and who you're surrounded by, how they're going to take it. And this is situational.
Oh, yes. So I would say that you're right. Like there's not like some recipe kit that I can go turn to. I will tell you that if you find yourself delivering tremendously bad news, like the type of news that is impacting lots of people and it's really tremendous, like you need to like back up and default to like public relation policies and who is the PR person in your firm, and maybe you aren't the person who's supposed to be saying that, like who is the next chain of command. And I think for larger organizations they put those public relation policies in place so that they are not faced with the personality part.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
We
right,
don't have
right.
to
Yeah,
worry
yeah.
about the
There's that.
personality part when we have policies in play. But, not every company is big like that. Not all bad things are bad at that level, but they're bad for the people that are involved in them.
Hmm.
And I'm hoping today, like we can, and I know from our work together prior to this, like I think we can give people some effective strategies to dealing with having to deliver bad news if we all agree that it's going to change the mood and change the direction. Like
Yeah.
what are some things that we want to talk about? And there's two things that you both brought out, and Oz, I'll start with you if you want to, and then Helen, I'll turn it over to you.
That
Oz,
looks
you
like he wants
mentioned
me to
not,
answer first.
yeah, not you. So Oz, you said not delivering the news was what you felt was like the worst approach, is not delivering the news.
Right. Because there's so many ways to think about it, so many ways to think about delivering. And then I found myself in situations where the more time that ticks, this is getting worse. And I definitely don't want to show up, like at the end of the day with this, or at the start of the weekend with this, or right before somebody's going into this important meeting tomorrow afternoon. Moment by moment, it's getting bad. So I'm thinking about the words I can say, what I need to bring. So bringing the evidence or some explanation of how we got here or how I uncovered this, that's important. But the actual words, my tone, you know, at some point it's just, hey, look, I found something awful. And,
Yeah,
and
right on out with it.
just say it, and their eyes are gonna get big and they fall out of the chair and then knock over their plants and stuff, and uh, you know this is better than me coming in an hour later with it all refined. No.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's another question: is somewhat so we have a question in the audience about who do you deliver it to first, but I would say is would you deliver it via email first or go talk to them? I personally think that people are very nervous when you say, do you have a few minutes to talk, especially if that's something that does make people nervous. So I would say sometimes emailing, because then you can get it documented. I discovered the problem at this time, and you may want to go and elaborate it later, but I think the first person you would go to is hopefully the person, your project sponsor, or the person you work for, or the person you work closely with, to describe the problem and also sort of get maybe a bit of a check, because sometimes it could be bad news, but it could also be, I'm on the wrong channel or something. Or
Yes. I'm writing that down because we don't need
that's too.
Yeah, we don't
Right.
need to forget, because that's
or
a whole other. Yeah.
So I would say that it's interesting as far as how to deliver it, in terms of maybe an email to say, look, there's an issue with this, and don't have a hard landing. Is instead kind of figure out who to talk to. And I'd say the other thing too is you're not alone in delivering it, is that and hopefully you're in a situation where you have allies that you can talk to and people that can help you out, instead of feeling like you have to deliver it all by yourself.
Yeah.
Even if they don't deliver it with you, they can help you, word it.
Yeah, I have so many, like there's just, like if I'm going to talk to, like, it also depends on how well you know the people that you're working with, right? Like there's some people that when I call them on the phone, they are going to immediately answer, and it doesn't matter what I say. Just the mere fact that I'm calling them on the phone is they're expecting to hear something maybe that they weren't really, because otherwise I'm communicating with them via email. So it's like, you when you have those kind of relationships, but sometimes you're like in a new situation, you're in a new department, you're with new people, you don't really know who anybody is. You don't want to play gossip or telephone either. Like, I'm going to tell my cubicle mate over here, and then by the time it makes it to the company powers that be, it's turned into something super inflated, and then they're all blaming the new guy. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like handle with care. So maybe the very first piece of advice or strategy we should suggest is, before you have to deal with bad news, learn how your organization deals with bad news.
Mm-hmm.
What does the organization have as an expectation of how you choose channels, so that way you're not learning that under duress. You know it when it hits.
Point is some companies and organizations have a channel for logging issues that come out. One example of this is, I know the U.S. State Department, for example, has a way that people that diplomats can essentially say something in a channel that allows it to be potentially part of a discussion, instead of there's not a public statement, right? Because especially for some people in different roles, if you say something publicly, that is public statement, there's liability associated with it. And so I think that when you have the bad news, is sometimes it's a bit of a process of figuring out what's going on. If I find bad news, I try to come up with a solution, at least an initial solution that might work. And then sometimes it's not, you don't want to deliver all the bad news at once. You want to say, there looks like an issue here. Maybe can you take a look at it? And then kind of creating a response based on that. And I say the other thing is documenting it, because a lot of times you say something, and maybe sometimes you don't want it to be documented. And there are cases of that. But in general, I think I try to document everything. And so it's that email chain and creating, notes and making sure that other people are included in the conversation in case someone leaves or someone's not part of that anymore. So making sure there's documentation on, what's going on.
I'm going to show a comment on here from Joe Adams, who is a longtime career colleague, mentor to me. Joe, thanks for being here. But I saw your comment, and I've been waiting because I know Helen also would appreciate this, because in some of her notes, she says, some of the worst approach is telling it too late to your timing point, Helen, and then also playing the blame game.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you deliver that, try to, like, even if you know unequivocally whose fault it is, that is likely not the time. Like it takes a professional maturity to understand that.
Yeah.
And you know something that you're getting into something really interesting because of the different types of bad news. There's like I uncovered something in an obsolete report that people have been using for 10 years. Okay, there is no blame. There's just a screwed up report and a whole lot of work to untangle things. And then there is the person you are putting in charge of this does not want to do it and makes it clear and is not even trying any training. That, because there is a person that I don't want to feel like some tattletale.
That's tough.
So that I think is harder than when, like, thousands of dollars are at stake.
Give me a broken
right?
function anytime over that scenario.
Well,
I think if I found myself in that scenario, though, I would be like, to the person that I'm supposed to be cross training, I think I may be saying, are you communicating to them that this is not something that you feel confident in? Or, I would try to get that person to communicate to who they report to, like, hey, because it's like, how do you go say, it's one thing to assess a person and say they're incapable of doing this without these skills. It's a whole different animal to say they don't want to do this and they're not trying. Like, that's just a different type of bad information.
Well, I'd say there's also some of this bad news has huge financial and legal impact, right? So, for example, if you have a file that's doing financial calculations and it's incorrect, you may have to file a report saying there was a mistake in the financial statements, and so that's a big deal, right? And there's thresholds for that. And then you've also, if you're, and this happens, or there's a reason there's like an S3 bucket hall of shame, is that if your data has been hacked, that also is something that has, legal obligations, right? Especially with credit card information.
Oh, yes.
So this bad news, I mean, I think that it's okay if this, then that goes back to the timing of it, because if you wait, then there's going to be a delay in that problem. And hopefully there's a channel to raise that in terms of, you go to someone and say there's a problem, that this is ultimately going to have to go through PR, because the PR person is probably doesn't know a lot of the people at a company, especially a large company. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a potential financial impact or legal impact, then that's something, again, going back to the documentation, and that's something that's pretty serious, that it has to be, the flag has to be raised. You're right. You raise the flag and say, here's an issue. And I think, and go to someone, make sure that they can, verify it too, especially. And then once after doing that, is it documented? And I think that, ask other people who've been in situations like that before how to manage it. And again, what Oz was saying was, with the personalities involved, is hopefully you work with someone who recognizes that and can say, okay, this has happened. And going back to avoiding blame, is saying, okay, what are the next steps to take this? Let's make sure this is documented. Who are the people impacted? What's the cost? What's the time on it? Because some of it is, having a solution to come with it. And even if there's a known blame, right, for it, because often there is, right, who set something up, who, and sometimes it's sometimes the person that ultimately kind of made the decision above, right, like buying a certain, piece of software or not buying it, that ultimately impacts people that might be farther down the hill, so to speak.
Right.
So it's that, reality of like noticing there's a problem, and then what needs to be done next, or what are the implications.
Man, this is such a great. I don't know why I'm so geeked out on this topic. Like it's a terrible to have to talk about bad news. I will say, security breaches, data hacks, like you said, anything that's regulated or has a legal implication, that is not bad news anymore. Now that is it may feel bad and it is bad news, but that's a different level of communication. Like the minute you have to have a regulation on top of it, you have to disclose it to all of the implications of a data breach, right? Like that's a whole other level. That's not quite hey, your function doesn't work well in your spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, the rules of engagement in some cases may be exactly the same, but that regulatory, that critical part of that information is probably going to be picked up by a process inside your organization. So I would say anything in relation to security and data, I definitely would handle those with kid gloves and maybe not take our strategies with bad news to the people in your organization who can help you work through that process. I thought Jill added something important here. Important not to come from a place of fear, but a place of leadership. And Jill, I just think that's super, super valuable. I also believe for some people so young into their careers, it may be hard to figure out how to come from a place of leadership when you're not in a leadership role. But when you're faced with delivering information like this, you're immediately thrust into a leadership role, whether you're actually titled as a leader or not. I mean, I think when you're delivering bad news, people are probably checking out your chops to see what kind of leadership skills, you actually have.
Yeah.
Well, and
Can I go back? Because I like that thing about separating the bad news versus things that have legal implications, because now you're talking about kind of whistleblower kind of stuff.
Mm.
And that is serious. And there was one time I did find something that I found just I almost want to use the word criminal. And I took it to HR, and HR took it to this guy's director. And then later on, I got called into the director's office and said, "Well, I talked with the guy, and we're handling it. And is that good
Thank you
enough
very
for
much.
you?" And no, he said, "Is that good enough for you?"
I
Like
think that's a
I
question
was,
shouldn't be
I was
asking you.
right. So it was dang.
Yeah.
That was just dumbfounding. But yeah, that was separate from you know just finding a bad function in a worksheet.
See, in that scenario, you find yourself on the receiving end of bad news. Again,
I found
unexpected.
myself.
Bad news is,
I,
wait, this guy just asked me if I'm okay. I'm telling him he may not be okay. What does
I,
it matter
I,
what
fe-
I think?
I felt the very real repercussions of being a whistleblower. That wasn't bad news. That was mind your own business.
Mm.
Yeah, that
That
sounds
was
like
now you got a target
there
on your
has to
back
be more
because
Yeah,
you
right. Because now you know the business. Yeah. It's
But then that's why there's I mean, there's bad news, right? And then there's whistleblowers, like they knowingly had this happen and they covered it up, right? And that's where if you work at a company and you do that, right, you do have legal protections. But to a certain it's hard to know everything that's going on. And I always think about the documentary, The Smartest Guys in the Room, about the Enron and how that was covered up. I mean, it's a fascinating accounting documentary about how essentially, blame was deferred and it was hidden in these pretty complex schemes. So there is that bad news, and what are the repercussions of it, or who handles it from somewhere, right? There could be people also that legally handle it, and then you would need people to fix it too.
yeah.
So what are the directions from here? You have to publicly acknowledge the problem, and then you have to, look at what needs to be done to stop what's going on, right? Whether that's putting a fix in, getting someone to do that. There's all sorts of, again, that's an important part about not delaying it, especially for catastrophic.
Yes. And then also, again, back to, I hate to say it, and we'll transition to, regular folks in regular places doing regular things. But if you work in an industry like what we're describing right now, like this is a critical thing for you to know early on in your career. Like you don't have to wait to read the company policy that you need to know all these things. Like you can seek these things out and know them ahead of time. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about like regular people doing regular things in regular environments.
Yeah, let's pull that back.
Let's take it back to like, the real strategies for a real person sitting inside a real office where, you've just discovered, and this is actually a real life scenario for me. We were working on a project. We discovered that what we were seeing in one calculation after refining the data structure is not what was showing on their production reports. And we thought there was a problem in our structure. So it's like the team came to me to deliver the bad news that, hey, we seem to not be able to balance the new reports against the production numbers. And we're unsure, like, is our calculation off? So it's kind of like, hey, we thought we were almost done, but now we're seeing this in our testing scenarios. And then we got to looking at it and we could never figure out like why our number wasn't right. And it was like, wait a second, this is the number, the production reports, these are numbers I've been reporting on. And I had no idea the extent of like how much money they'd been overpaying, but I knew they had been overpaying. So again, I pick up the phone and I'm like, hey, made this discovery, not really sure how deep, like, what do you need from us? Here's what we need from you. Let's get this settled out and figure out, like, is this a big deal or not? Because it is one of those scenarios where until we fleshed it out, we don't know if it's bad or is it a little bad and a little blip, or is it like big bad and like somebody's going to have to be talking to somebody bad. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I think these scenarios are really important and happen all the time for data analysts, especially like when you're early on in your career. You're just like, is any of this right? You try to have all these validation methods to make sure you're right. And
right.
You find something bad. Is it really bad? And what do you literally do when you discover something is off in your data that might produce that bad news?
Right. And that happened to me, situation. And there again, it was like some obsolete reports, and I found some things were off, and we owed some people like, $50. And my director said, it's good that you found that, but given everything and the magnitude of what we're dealing with, $50, even if we owed everybody $50, this is not worth chasing down. Even if we just gave people, said, here's an explanation and we're giving everybody $500, whatever. But the digging involved is not worth it. And I wanted to be sure. And this is where, like, my director told me, leave this alone. This is how we can handle it. But yeah, it just still felt funny to me. And then I went back, I disobeyed his orders, I kept digging, found out we owed some people over $2,000. Now I'm dealing with, how do I go back and say, not only did I not listen to you, but I found something worse? And there was, I just had to go in and just say, look. And then he said, didn't I tell you we're moving on from this? Yes, you did. But, and when I told him, go full speed ahead and figure this shit out because this is
Right.
bad.
Right. Right.
But and it was a situation where I could not sit and ponder too long and get the
Mhm.
words right. I just had to go and say, look, I didn't listen to you, but
So let me ask you this again, because I just think there's so much value in this. If you could look at that retrospectively, could it have been that you weren't just willfully ignoring his direction to you, but it's like maybe up front you didn't communicate how far or how deep this may go? Because maybe if you'd have said, I don't know how far this goes, or did you
Mm.
say that? Like,
No, I said I
yeah.
don't know, but I checked a few and something's off. But I know where the problem is coming from. I just
Mm,
don't know. So we got two things. We owe some people some money. We got a report that needs to be fixed, or we need some kind of a workaround. Um, but here's what I have found so far.
okay.
And and I that was me really like saying, look, I found something and I'm going to keep digging into it, but I wanted you to know because I might have to stop my process, my normal process to dig into this. And that's when he said, no, we're not stopping your normal process to dig into that
Yeah.
because, you know,
Right.
because what you found is small potatoes.
Yeah. Because
And
see,
right,
that's,
and
yeah.
50, yeah, okay.
So sometimes leaders, shocking development, are humans.
And
And he
we're
heard
all
what
human.
you
Yeah,
said as fit. Like, I
right.
could understand, like, if you thought what you were saying was every one of these are like possibly $50. But as a data leader, when I heard you say that, I heard you say there may be a calculation issue. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You know,
mm-hmm.
if he says, "Oh, it's 100 people, $50, no big deal," but in your brain, you're like, "There's a calculation that's off. That's probably impacting all these other things." Some people can't see inside our heads, and if
Right,
they
they
don't
can't
see
see
what
inside.
we
Yeah,
do, it's really easy for them to misinterpret
Mhm.
what we're saying to them.
right. But
Yeah.
there's also the reality, and I think this kind of gets into Fernanda's comment about choosing the right time and offering realistic solutions.
Mm,
Um, I don't often have the power to enact a solution, right? And this is where the director is saying, thanks for finding this. He'll come up with a solution, but move on. My regular process was more important. And so I was the belligerent one who kept digging. Um, but also there is the reality that we've got finite resources.
right.
You know, the company is moving. You know, people are placing orders constantly, calling in, placing orders through the website. um, you know, you find a report that's obsolete, it could be months before it gets fixed. And so I remember one thing that a vice president said, and I really hold on to this because it was profound. I felt he said, in a unrelated situation, he said, we have to make a decision.
Mm,
Even if the decision is to do nothing, we've made a decision, but
woo,
we can't keep farting around with this.
right, right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and then you've got, if you look at, say, backlogs for product development, so for all the programmers and product managers, similar roles out there, is that you've got an issue, right? So if something goes live, right, and then you find an issue, is okay. The bad news, well, where does that go in the queue? The other thing I think with delivering bad news is sometimes you say, well, this is broken. I mean, and by the way, sometimes I think that we may have an observation and we don't necessarily frame it correctly.
Yes.
As you said, well, this isn't working. But that's not descriptive enough to, to indicate that this is, bad news or that this is something that needs to be addressed. It's looking at logging a bug for anything is okay. Here's the context in which we see this. So I log in, here's a screenshot, here's what I see. And then, this is what I expect to see. This is what I see. And so that's part of the bad news delivery. And then saying it looks like this goes back to this source, finding where the issue occurs. And then, well, here's the impact. So it's kind of the who, what, when, where, why, how,
it's the collection of proof and verification. And it's also the, hey, Desmond put in here, do you assume some responsibility to determine the root cause of the bad news before its delivery? No.
Sometimes you can't.
No, because root cause analysis, that's such an excellent question.
Yes, it is.
You can't do root cause analysis until you through the problem, right?
Right.
And I think we do assume some responsibilities to collect information that can then be, because remember, bad news again changes the mood and changes the direction. And so we gotta come up with strategies. Like, you can come to me and tell me there's a problem. You have found this thing. And if you're on my team, I'm going to be looking at you like, well, what else are you about to tell me about how to fix it? Like, don't bring me a problem without bringing me a solution. That's our culture, right? That's not everybody's. That's not everybody's style.
Can do that. Okay. I think it's nice to have.
Can I say, I have always disagreed with that. I have heard, if you found a problem, can you bring me some kind of solution? Because I don't know the politics. I don't have the resources that you have, and why I don't always have the final, here is what's wrong. I might need permissions to get access to certain reports.
Well,
I might need somebody.
Okay, maybe solution is not the right thing, but I don't believe you. I don't believe you because in just your recent scenario, you said you tell the guy, he tells you to stop.
Right.
You go on and do your due diligence anyway because you knew there was a problem there. So maybe it's not so much bring me a solution, but bring me what the next step is.
Okay.
Tell me what the next step is. Like, to me, that is part of the solution. So, I'm never going to say that again, Oz. I'm going to say, bring me the next step.
Right, because I hear things like, why did such and such stop? And I finally get somebody high up to explain to me, well, there's politics and nobody wanted to sign off on it. And because whoever signs off on it, they're going to be the dirt bag when it doesn't work for somebody else. I said, oh, okay. I'm not privy to that kind of stuff until years later when everybody's laid off and we're sitting around drinking,
Well, I think there's a value in knowing like what feels bad newsy to you, and you take it to the executives or the leadership above you, and they're like, calm down. They have way more access to information than you do.
Right.
And so I think there's value in knowing, hey, maybe their reaction isn't they're doing some horrible criminal cover up, but maybe they just have information you're not privy to. And if you knew what they knew,
right,
you would probably calm down a little bit. But now you can get so stopped. Like you can get so stopped. Like you, in your case, I would diagnose you as stopped. Like I can't move forward in my life if I don't figure out what this problem is because I know it's bad. Like sometimes that happens.
That sounds like a developer thing.
Do what?
That sounds like a developer thing. I'll be out figuring out what's going on until I fix it.
Until I fix it.
I would also say the other thing is that how, on the delivering bad news is also thinking about the other side of it in the terms of receiving the bad news. Is there a set of procedures to take to to change it or to what needs to happen next. And one of the things that I think is interesting is I think that everyone makes mistakes at some point, but often
Yes.
it's the way we frame it. I mean, I've seen people have come to others and say, well, there's an issue here. This you're not picking up something up in this Excel file. And the worst thing you can do is say, well, there's not an issue. So, well, let me take a look at it. And then if there is an issue, saying, okay, I'll fix it, or I'll do that, is being part of the solution rather than kind of like raising the emotions that are in the room or in the discussion, is saying, okay, well, what's going to take the heat off of that. So, we're talking about delivering bad news, but sometimes it helps to think about how we would receive them and how others would receive them, in terms of saying, oh, here's the issue. Now let's fix it. Let's figure out what's going on, rather than feeling like, okay, you're just dropping the blame on someone, because that's often what we see is organizations that do that often don't get very much done.
Right. Yes, because they're busy blaming each other and not solving any problems.
It's a culture of a blame game and not a culture of, getting stuff done. I mean, and there's obviously a difference between the blame game and building the plane while you're flying it, to follow a well-known analogy.
Yeah,
but there is
that
thing of moving forward and thinking, well, what this is, I recognize this is an issue, and how can you fix it and potentially even eliminate, others making that mistake. Like Oz brought up the fixing Excel formulas. If you fix it and you organize it well, so that others don't see that, that others don't run into the same issue and don't make the same mistake, is how to be part of the solution ultimately. That, and ultimately sometimes we may not know that, but if we can, right, that's that's
one thing we have to recognize, that everybody's in different, like we all use data. Almost all people use data somehow. We're all in various positions, career places, like job places, like we're all over the place. It's all different. But I think that universally, if you detect a problem and you're unsure exactly who to tell, figure that out. Like, who am I supposed to tell? When I do tell, who do I tell?
How do I tell it to them?
How do I tell it? Like, what am I telling it, and telling it in a way that's clear and constructive? And then preparing for the aftermath of what's going to happen, or the lack of math that's going to happen based on the delivery of whatever you do. I think if you can just step back and like earlier you said, like, I'm going to document this. I document everything. I would document everything, especially if you're going to go tell somebody, I'm going to document it. Why? Yeah. Not because I want to have some legal document. Yes, that's good. But no, I want to get my thoughts out.
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes people will go rush and go take something, and they won't have taken at least 15 minutes to draft out what they think they're going to say and read through it and think about the delivery of it. I think those are all easy things that you can do.
Yeah. I would also,
in any scenario.
I would also say, one of what we're seeing with some of the, recent comments on the live session is that I think what's happened has happened, right? And also the other thing that I always keep in mind, I remember hearing this when I was in college, is don't worry about the things you can't control. So if there's something that you don't have control of, it's a problem, is that what has happened has happened. So in terms of that has happened, you can't go back in the past and fix it, but look at, recognizing it from this objective point of view, because then that will, it takes that emotions out, especially when people get mad. It takes and upset and angry. It takes a long time to recover from that. That's a negative emotion that ultimately draws away from other emotions, and being able to spend energy fixing it if you can.
So true.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it doesn't make them angry. Sometimes it actually makes them sad. Like in my case, finding out we had just spent weeks of effort to host this event, so that we could then come out and broadcast it to all of our followers and like have this big fun, to find out that that did not exist anymore. That plan is now changed. That can't happen. Like, I don't know that I ever got mad. I think I just was profoundly sad.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh no,
Right.
like really, really, really sad about
And
it.
then you had to tell us.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
for me, it was like, well, I got to move forward. So like when you're also delivering information like this for people to act on, like we at some point we have to take it all in. Unfortunately, figure out if we believe you based on your approach. You know what I mean? Do I believe you when you bring me this problem? And again, because bad news changes directions, like you may be taking me as not paying attention, not appreciating you, but all I'm really doing is processing, how am I going to get myself and this company out of this ditch you just showed me that I was in, that I did not know I was in. Like, there's just a lot there. I think we could talk all year about this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
One other thing is that I'm curious about whether approaches may change in the future, based on different demographics, like cultures, age groups, right? There's so many different ways we can split up, that populations or different, organizations themselves, as people have mentioned, is how to handle that, right? One interesting thing is if you look at, older generations and people that have already retired often, that are well out of the workforce, is that there's often a culture of oh, this needs to be addressed, whether it's often bad news, which may not be urgent, but a lot of things are urgent. But you see with a lot of younger people that are entering, they're just out of school, is that they think, well, is someone dying here, or is this, it's you don't work in you don't work in an ER, so there is that, how to frame the problem in a way that's helpful. Because I think that some of it is maybe that previously seemed more emotionally charged approaches to solving things, and that people had this like this, they gave bad news or they received bad news, and they thought they had to show themselves as doing something, whereas maybe younger people kind of reframe it a bit differently. But this is just an interesting topic, because
I just think we ought to talk about it all year long. I think we should come back for the Relentless Analyst and just unpack every single piece of this.
We'll take a walk.
This unexpected delivering bad news. It's actually an enjoyable and I think profoundly impactful to me, just thinking through like, how do I communicate this to the people that I'll be educating so that they go in prepared to their careers, knowing, hey, this is a thing that we should probably figure about, like how we're gonna deal with it.
Yeah,
I don't know. We're getting close to time, so do we want to
walk? By the way,
yeah. So we have about 2 more minutes left. Do we want to have a few closing?
Well, I did want to say that I like what you said, Robin, earlier about when you're calling somebody, it's already kind of a signal that something's off.
Yeah.
And also to recap, kind of this conversation started when we're talking about what makes a good analyst, and it's more than just being good with Excel or SQL or whatever. It's this kind of stuff. And I like to take on personas. Because like when I'm struggling with an Excel challenge, I'm that dirty sheriff with this old tired horse, but I'm the horse and my gun. That's what I need, and I'm gonna clean up all this mess. When it comes to delivering the bad news, I thought about myself as this shadow.
Ah.
If you see me at your office door, open up. You can't resist me. It's time.
Well, they hear the horse coming in first.
So that was my persona, because anytime I showed up at somebody's door unexpected, I wasn't inviting them to lunch.
Yeah, yeah. And they probably didn't want to eat lunch with you after,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Y'all, this has been so great. I definitely think, and if our audience agrees, they can certainly let us know. I definitely think we should use this year coming ahead to talk about maybe the year of Relentless Analyst focuses on communication, because really what we're talking about here is ways to communicate, and delivering bad news is certainly one of those. But our time is up. I've had such a
All
great
right.
time. I love you guys. Oh, I miss you
Right.
both. I
Right.
can't wait for us all to be
Yes.
together again. So
Yes.
very
Yes. We
good
must.
stuff. Thanks for everybody who joined us online, and be following us for more information on when we're going to come back and talk more about the Relentless Analyst. Okay.
All
See you
right.
next time.
Yep. Right.